Hi, I'm Shapiro. I'm the founder of Ellis Brooklyn, and today we're going to learn about how to choose a scent to tell your own story. So before Ellis Brooklyn, I was writing for the New York Times. I was writing beauty and celebrity, and that's really where my journey started in beauty. My first event was actually in fragrance, and I just was blown away by the whole world and how you can smell a scent and just be immediately transported. I love that stories in literature and scent have escapism elements to it, and if you think about it, they're actually very similar in the sense that there is a storyline. So in fragrances, there is a top, there's a mid, and there's a dry. So the top is your intro, the mid is the heart of your plot, and then the dry is really how it finishes. And you want all of that to tie together really beautifully. So I was 7 years into this columnist job at the New York Times, and I was pregnant with my daughter Ellis, living in Brooklyn. And I just started to look at scent world, and I just thought there was something I could add to it. I felt like there wasn't so many diverse faces. There was very few women in the industry, and I just thought, how unique would it be to come from a different creation perspective and see where that could go. Fragrance is so personal. So fragrance in Ellis Brooklyn's line is actually just a reflection of my life. So I'm always inspired by words. So I'm inspired by quotes, I'm inspired by poetry, I'm inspired by nonfiction writing. So that will always be part of our scent inspiration. But then I take that and then I really apply it to how it might live in our real life. So for example, with salt, it's inspired by this beautiful quote about how water is so soul healing, salt water particularly. But then I really think about how does that apply to our daily lives. And I just think having a scent that's so transportive, the second you breathe in salt, it really takes you somewhere, is really important to me. And then the last part is I love working with master perfumers. I really think they're just these amazing artists. And I think they paint their picture in a way that's invisible and that is so powerful and really tells a story in a way without even writing anything. So I love not focusing too much on the ingredients actually. The reason why is because there's so many types of roses, they're blended so many different types of ways, and you just don't know how they're going to be in a composition. So I actually like first asking yourself or somebody else that you might be shopping for a scent is, how do you want to be seen? And that goes back to what mood are you in, what character do you want to be today, or what person do you want to be as an aspirational kind of thing. And that sounds super general, but it's actually not, because let's say you want to say, I want to feel like a warm heroine today, right? Which is like a very broad sounding thing, but that actually limits down your fragrances first to just the warm ones. And then when we think of heroine, are you more bold? Do you want something that really has a huge trail, a lot of longevity, and then can kind of go from there? So it actually narrows down your world quite a bit, because it's really difficult to try a lot of fragrances in one session. So it's much better if you just start to narrow down the world. Scent is really a passport to expressing yourself in the way you want to be. It doesn't have to be who you are today. It doesn't even have to be who you are yesterday or tomorrow. It actually just is your ideal self. Sci-Fi I call my intellectual vanilla. This is a scent that wants to be warm and cozy, but doesn't quite go there because it's a little bit more unique. It's a little bit more offbeat. And with Sci-Fi, I was inspired by Dune, which is a very classic sci-fi novel, now in the Timothée Chalamet movie. And it's about spice, which is an element in the book, and actually turns the person who ingests spice eyes this color. So that's why Sci-Fi is this color. And the reason why I chose vanilla is because the best and most effective sci-fi novel plots are ones that are familiar. So it's about mother and son, about mother and daughter, about son and father, and those kind of storylines, but then they take it in a new way or a new setting. So this is about taking vanilla, which is the most familiar ingredient in perfumery, everybody recognizes it, and doing it in a whole new way. So this is actually, I like to call it an intellectual vanilla. So it has vanilla bean, it has green tea, it has bitter orange. It's a little bit unusual, but also familiar. So Myth is my favorite. It's my personal fragrance. I made it for myself, so this one for me will always have a personal significance. And for me, Myth is about spoken literature or spoken stories, and it's actually about living in New York. So I call it my ultimate Brooklyn scent because it's intentionally subtle. I don't want it to scream. I want it to be something where you lean in, and when you put it on your neck, people want to smell more. You know, a game of telephone where you're telling a story, you're leaning in, you're saying this little tidbit, and then it gets passed on and passed on. So that's really where Myth is from, like an urban myth. So it's not necessarily a book, but just how a story can sort of spin its yarn. Myth is really just a touch of floral, a touch of cassis, but it's really white musk, ambrette, and white cedar wood. Myth to me is that New York really chic hotel scent. It's the clean sheets, it's the warmth of your skin as you come out of bed. It's getting ready for the day, wearing head to toe black, that's Myth. So there's this trend that's happening right now called dark feminine. It's actually a hashtag, but it actually resonates so deeply with me, probably because I grew up in Seattle and there is this sort of, it's not even goth, it's just like a darker expression of being feminine that I really love. And I think about that with bee. So bee for me is somebody who doesn't mind being different. It is a very unique honey scent, but it actually has a lot of spice to it, a little bit of darkness. It's not so dark that it doesn't have any lift. It just is somebody who's not afraid of that. And for me, that's the kind of scent that is really signature, but also just so different. And somebody can strike a conversation about it. So there's vegan honey in here, but there's also cocoa shell, rum, and a little bit of sandalwood as well. I made bee because I call it a fragrance for falling in self-love. So for me, I just want to keep smelling myself. So there's a cozy aspect to it. It's about reflecting inward as opposed to reflecting outward. I'm not a florals girl, so this was a real challenge. And it was funny because when I said I wanted to do a floral, and I said I want to push, you know, what the idea of femininity is, I reached out to Frank because I had done Sunfruit and Après with him. And I really thought if anyone was going to do a different floral, then he would do a different floral. And the funniest thing was like, why do you want to do a floral? He said, he's like, you're not a white floral girl. Ellis Brooklyn's not a white floral girl. Like, we shouldn't do this. And so it was actually a whole conversation about what white floral means to us. And for me, I wanted this uplifting, like very, almost like your body comes out of your body. And that's really where Florist comes from. So there is a juicy pear note, there's lemon, it's super bright. And then you have this airy bouquet of tuberose, of gardenia, honeysuckle. And it really is this optimism in a bottle, I guess you could say. That was the idea. There is a quote that Florist is inspired by, and it's by Lady Bird Johnson, and the quote goes, "Where flowers bloom, so does hope." So with Florist, I really wanted it to be very optimistic. I wanted somebody to spray it in the store, just feel uplifted. And that was the idea about adding air to tuberose. So tuberose is a very dense, very creamy floral, super powerful and fascinating, but can also read really old and almost a little bit too syrupy. And so for us, that meant adding the pear notes, adding the lemon notes, adding a really vibrant bouquet around it. So there's honeysuckle, there's gardenia, and it just surrounds the tuberose and gives it more life. So Sol, I love the idea of a scent being soul healing, and there's this amazing Isaac Dinesen quote, and her real name is actually Karen Blixen, but that was her pseudonym, was Isaac Dinesen. She talks about salt water being soul healing, whether it's sweat, tears, or the sea, and I just love that. I feel like that resonates so deeply with me. Also, her writing is beautiful, and I was so inspired by her life that that's where salt came from. I also felt like she was ahead of her time in that she moved to this big farm, she ran it. This was, you know, a century ago, I think. And so for this woman to do that, I thought was really bold. And so salt is intentionally very genderless, very unisex. And the idea is that first moment when the sun hits the sea, you step outside and you breathe it all in, you don't have sunscreen on yet. It's not about that sunscreen solar scent. It's about that moment that you encounter the sea. So I intentionally did not want to use aquatic in here. I think there's aquatic notes like cologne and hedione that are very common in aquatic type scents, but I almost feel like there's a synthetic quality to it. It's not really of the sea. And if you think about a salty smell, there's actually a brininess to it. So this actually contains a lot of vegan ambergris or ambergris, and it has a briny, super salty character, and that's really what we relied on. If you want to feel like you're stepping out into Big Sur, California, I think of salt. It's the crashing waves, it's a little bit cool, no air still, but the sun is about to come out, and also you just want to be out in nature and breathing in that fresh, salty air, and that's salt. So Sweet was an interesting exercise because it actually launched with salt together. We had never launched two scents together ever and still have not. And so for me, it was an exploration of gourmand and the different taste profiles you can actually get from gourmand. So obviously you can get sweet notes, and then salt was our sort of counter to that. So for me with Sweet, I actually wanted it to be so lighthearted, so direct, almost a little straightforward, and also nostalgic. So I really thought about baking. I thought about the moments you spend with your loved ones in the kitchen. So there's pear, there's marshmallow, but then there's also orris in there, and it rounds out with a cashmere musk. So the reason why Sweet is this light daffodil yellow is because there's this really great poem by E.E. Cummings that is called In the Time of Daffodils. And this poem is really interesting because it talks about daffodils and how simplistic yet joyful they are. So they bloom in the spring, they die, but during this short life, they just live. And that's the idea behind Sweet. Sunfruit is like your summer beach read. It's not so serious, it's really fun. And it's inspired by the Italian Riviera. Think of like limoncello, yellow, that kind of thing. The base notes here are really the spectacular part. So there's coconut, there's vanilla, there's musk, and we actually built in the base notes up. So we layered on the fruit after. So it's creamy fig, it's pear, there's a little bit of floral in there, but it's really about this really rich, almost hedonistic fruity floral. I feel like sunfruit is like a bachelorette party. It's like going on a vacation. It's having a lot of fun. So après and sunfruit was actually made almost hand in hand. We actually created après first. So that was inspired by après ski, all the woodsy notes, but also the actual après ski with like a boozy drink and some sweetness and praline and vanilla from like the waffles you might get on the mountain. And then sunfruit came from that because we just wanted to go the whole other direction and be inspired by summer beach reads and Italian Riviera and just this very lighthearted take on a vacation in a sense. So I love the idea that you can literally spray on a fragrance and be transported. It's almost like your little passport to a trip without actually going on a trip. So you can spray on sunfruit and go to Italian Riviera, or you can spray on après and go to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Thank you for hanging with me and talking about scents in Ellis Brooklyn. They're my favorite topics. If you want to learn more about how to find a scent that tells your own story, go into Mecca stores and find a fragrance specialist, or go online to MECCAversity.